Today on Market Journal, where's the beef? Hopefully it's being transported properly. We'll tell you about some new livestock hauling guidelines. Plus, before you spray, hear what the expert has to say. We're talking pesticide safety and proper management strategies. And forget farmers only. This website will match hungry cows with fields that need to be grazed. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hey everybody, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. It's a busy time of year for lots of folks, so I'm glad you're able to spend a little bit of your day with us. New guidelines for hauling livestock, pesticide news, and tips to help with grazing, all on today's show. So let's get started. Before this week's market analyst joins us, we'll get a check of the numbers for the week ending November 11th. And somebody needs to tell Mother Nature that we're still over a month away from winter because snow still on the ground in some parts. Nevertheless, though, harvest is chugging along, and these numbers come to us from the USDA. Beginning with corn, and harvest reached 84% complete. That's up from 76% last week and above 81% a year ago. Moving on to soybeans, and harvest ticked up to 88% complete. It was 83% a week ago. The current harvest number is behind last year and the 5-year average of 93%. And as for winter wheat, 89% is planted and 77% is emerged. The weather has caused a lag in that crop too. The 2017 pace and the 5-year average are both at 94%. The crop is rated at 54% good to excellent. Our first guest is market analyst Elaine Cubb. She's also written the book Mastering the Grain Markets, How Profits Are Really Made. Lots of news in the ag world, and she's going to help us make sense of it all. Elaine, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure.
And to begin, any numbers that jumped out at you with the latest crop progress report?
Yeah, so this crop progress report, we only see the numbers as of Sunday night, but pretty much all of the row crop harvest is about 90% complete probably as we're speaking now, which is a few percentage points behind the average pace, but not to be unexpected, especially given that snow that we saw last week in Nebraska and Kansas. And I think the bigger concern might be that cotton harvesting, that's behind pace, and more concerningly, because that snow in Texas would be a real problem for cotton harvest. But as far as the market implications for any of that, even the cotton is not really seeing a price boost because of any late harvest.
And yeah, you mentioned the weather, and I've read that for a lot of folks, the second half of harvest going a lot slower than the first. And the weather, big reason for that. And you were telling me yesterday even that it's been a challenge for you. So from what you've seen, has that been the case for the majority of people?
Yes, it has been a long and I think frustrating harvest. It seems like everywhere the delays weren't just, little weather delays. They were sort of big, long 10-day delays, or the moisture was really, concerning about the soybeans. Even in Iowa, there were soybeans popping out of pods or sprouting in the fields. So there was a time this harvest when you did get a boost in the soybean prices because of those concerns about quality issues or moisture issues. But I think now that's sort of been resolved. We're past the gut slot of harvest, and now we just trade towards the end of the year.
And one of your recent articles talks about how producers are already looking ahead to the 2019 growing season and deciding on their mix of soybeans versus corn. What's your advice on that situation?
Yeah, Troy, this is the time of year when you sort of look at your yields and think what would be best for next year and start buying seed. We look at the price scenario. Obviously, soybeans are not very favorable. We expect to see soybeans valued 2.5 times the price of corn, and that's just sort of the 10-year average that you see in the futures and in the cash prices. But so that would imply, let's say you've got $4 corn for 2019 futures, which is exactly what it was this morning, then you should have $10 soybean futures for 2019, and that is not what we're seeing. That soybean futures market is 60 or 70 cents away where it should be compared to that average. So that means as farmers are projecting out their acres for next year or buying seed or putting down fertilizer, soybeans do not look very favorable, and obviously this is a result of this trade war that has really impacted our U.S. soybean prices and our soybean basis.
What are some of the big international stories that you're following right now? I know you just mentioned trade. Anything else that's going on?
Yeah, so through the end of November, I don't think we're going to see the soybean market maybe make any new fresh lows or any big momentum either direction, because that soybean market is waiting to see how the U.S. and Chinese presidents get on at the G20 summit, which will be November 30th. So I think we're in a standstill until then. But meanwhile, we are seeing global edible oil prices continue to fall. Malaysian palm oil prices are on a downward trend. Crude oil prices are on a downward trend, which suggests that commodity traders are just worried about global raw material demand everywhere. So that could start to knock on corn, ethanol prices, obviously. Just these outside markets that the grains are staying stable, but there's a lot of volatility in the outside markets that could eventually knock us.
And what are some of the big questions you've been getting from farmers over the past few weeks?
Well, you know, what do you do about soybeans? What do you do about soybean basis? And I don't think that there's much we can do. You know, let's say we do get some great news from the G20 summit or some good rumor that really juices up soybean futures. That could happen quickly, but to actually repair the physical soybean market and start getting shuttle trains, start shipping back to the PNW, that will take time. I think the soybean basis thing is just a waiting game, and hopefully folks had storage plans that they could store as much as their own soybeans as they could.
And last time you were on the show, we talked about grain storage. And with harvest getting closer and closer to being finished, how do things look on that front?
Well, I think that there has been a great trend in the industry over the past, let's say, 5-10 years of people building on-farm storage and putting themselves in a good position to capture the carry or to wait for better basis prices in the spring. So that's been heartening. I think folks came into this harvest knowing that this would be a problem, and they mostly had a plan. I haven't heard anybody getting too much stuck yet.
Elaine Cub, I appreciate you talking to me today. We'll do it again soon.
It's a pleasure.
Next week, we'll be joined by DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist Bryce Anderson. We'll talk to him about the role weather has played in this year's harvest and the big weather stories that could happen this winter. Several weeks back, various ag groups from around the state announced new livestock hauling guidelines. These new rules look to stress the importance of safety while making sure the relationship between law enforcement and Nebraska producers remains strong. We Support Agriculture is one of the groups involved. I was joined by Executive Director Kristen Hassebrook to talk about what WSA does and what these new guidelines will mean for Nebraska.
We Support Agriculture was formed by the leading sort of livestock organizations in the state to promote policies and a regulatory climate and a business climate that's favorable toward, modern animal agriculture. So we work on issues important to livestock, and livestock hauling is a very important issue for the livestock industry.
The livestock hauling guidelines that you just mentioned, that's a big reason you're here today. Could you tell us the details on that and who else is part of this effort?
It's been quite a coalition. The livestock industry, as well as Nebraska State Patrol, the Nebraska Department of Agriculture, and the University of Nebraska Extension all participated in a several-month sort of process to look at how do we respond to incidents where livestock haulers are put out of service when they're on the road, basically.
Kind of talk about why do you think these new guidelines are necessary? Maybe give us a high-level overview of what all we're looking at with these new guidelines.
Well, it doesn't happen very often, but hauling livestock and poultry is very different than hauling widgets. When you have to stop a truck that has livestock or poultry on it, you're stopping a vehicle that has live animals, and that brings into play animal welfare issues and any other number of sort of animal issues as compared to a box of, a cardboard box of widgets that are in the back of a truck.
And yeah, you mentioned animal welfare. How is that being addressed with these new guidelines?
Yeah, so with the new guidelines, nothing's changing in what they could have done. We're just sort of harmonizing and putting in place protocols and procedures so there's consistency across the board and some really sound, channels of communication. When a livestock hauler is put out of service, there's now a sort of formalized checklist that Nebraska State Patrol will be working through, and that checklist is also now available for haulers. So they know exactly what's going to be asked of them. They can honestly prepare in advance to know kind of what will be the top questions and make that process move more quickly. So that saves time when someone's put out of service. Probably the biggest piece of the guidelines that will be favorable toward animal welfare is the fact that we're engaging with the regional state veterinarians and then coordinating a 30-minute escort window from where that hauler is stopped to a place where they can offload safely and quickly and have access to food and water.
And these new rules, they've taken effect right now as we speak.
Yes, we actually announced them with a press conference with the governor a couple of weeks ago, and they are up and operational.
All right, so where can people get more information?
You can find more information at the We Support Ag website, just wesupportag.org, or the Nebraska State Patrol website, and any of our commodity board organizations, as well as the Department of Ag and the University Extension.
We've got the We Support Ag website right here on the screen. That's where you can find more details on the guidelines Kristen was talking about. You can also print out various forms and checklists to make the process easier. It seems like pesticides are always in the news. Just late last month, the USDA updated its national roadmap for integrated pest management. And that was the first update in more than 5 years. And earlier this month, news came out that farmers spend more than $12 billion annually on pesticides. And to put that in perspective, farmers spent a little over $2 billion annually in the 1960s. So with it always being such a hot topic, I spoke with UNL Extension's Clyde to see what's going on in the upcoming year as far as pesticides go.
So the immediate changes that we're seeing for this next year are really centered around label-specific requirements. The big one, of course, that happened this last year was with dicamba, but we're going to see the same thing possibly with 2,4-D, with Enlist genetics coming out there. We're going to see those kind of real specific training requirements, more details of how you make the applications, and a whole list of record-keeping requirements. Now, looking forward, the big change in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be what we call the Cmt Rule Changes. They're actually going to go in and change the FIFRA set of regulations that govern all of these things that have to do with pesticide applications. The biggies on that are for private applicators, farmers and ranchers. They will have additional categories, which we've never seen before. Categories such as fumigation for grain, or non-grain fumigation would be like for vertebrates, rodents, and so forth. Then we will see aerial as an application category for private applicators. Along with that, we're seeing a change in competency standards, and the impact that's going to have is primarily on the time spent in training sessions. We're almost certainly going to see longer training sessions for our pesticide applicators. The other one is age. Minimum age will most likely be set at 18 rather than 16 as it is now in many cases. Anyway, the last one that we have seen with this new Cmt rule change is the requirement to prove who you are basically when you go to your training session. That'll be a big change for both our extension educators that conduct the training as well as the applicators. Will have to show who they are when they come for training.
Gotcha. Okay, let's touch on herbicide drift for a second. Maybe give us some general ideas of any management strategies to deal with that.
Right. So the number one thing we always suggest is to read the pesticide label. Read it before you buy it, understand it before you get to the application season. Planning ahead is really key. You need to make sure that you've got the right nozzles, the right equipment that can be in compliance with the label recommendations, and to help yourself in preventing that drift. So if you're going to make the applications yourself, there's a greater burden on you than if you call up the co-op and say, here, go ahead and spray these acres for me. So the burden is on you to investigate, read, understand, go to training programs, know what you're doing before you ever even set foot in the field. Now, the nozzles today that are both recommended on labels as well as what are available for farmers are designed to reduce drift straight away. Adjuvants and additives that you can put with your spray mixture can help reduce the size of the droplet, which ultimately will help you in managing that drift. Measuring your environmental conditions. It's being required on many labels today, but just doing that proactively can help you. Identifying if there's an inversion. You don't want to be applying when there's inversion.
Yeah.
If your wind speed is too high or too low, actually if there's doing 0 and 3 miles an hour, that's not a good time to apply pesticides because it can drift more easily. So planning ahead that way is really important. Above all else, you are responsible if that product drifts off your property and damages your neighbor's crops.
Yeah, and that's a responsibility you don't want to have, that's
right,
for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so with the 2019 coming up, any pesticide safety education programs that you want to tell us about?
Right, there's a whole number of them, of course, but we will continue to offer the specific dicamba training both online and in person. We have an online course for private applicators that will be brand new this year, much improved over what we've had previously. All the private training is done by our county extension educator staff. Those notices will be sent out and as well as on our website. We offer commercial training, in particular for our commercial applicators related to agriculture, but all the other full range of categories that we address.
For more information, Clyde says you can head over to pested.unl.edu. We've got the website right there for you on the screen, and of course you can always get some good information from your local extension office too. We're all familiar with the slew of dating websites that promise to match you with the person of your dreams. Well, now researchers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln are connecting people in the ag field. Hold on, it's not quite what you think. The Crop Residue Exchange is a website that helps farmers with extra forage and crop residue link up with cattle producers who need a place for their animals to graze. UNL's Dr. Jay Parsons and Dr. Daren Redfearn stopped by to talk about the Crop Residue Exchange and the research that led to its creation.
Well, the research that we had looked at basically reasons for corn stalk grazing, whether they did it or didn't, and if they didn't, why, and would they allow it for what price would they allow it for. And basically what we found out was that of those that don't allow grazing on their corn stalks, about 40% of them said they wouldn't no matter what the price. And for the other 60% that would, the prices varied quite a bit, anywhere from $1 an acre, actually free. I think 17% of those said they would do it for free, on up to $15 an acre or more. So there's a number of reasons why they wouldn't allow it. Number one being compaction and things like that that might affect that next crop, and Daren would have a lot more to add.
Yeah, a lot of the reasons that they don't want cattle on the pasture, the reasons that they give are because it impedes some kind of field operation. Specifically, oftentimes some of them will implement some fall tillage, some of them will do some fall application of anhydrous ammonia. There's some rumors going around, if you will, that cattle cause quite a bit of compaction on these cropland, and then so some producers will mention that they're a little bit concerned about some of the compaction that occurs, but primarily it's more of a surface roughness as opposed to some of the deep compaction like would be caused by some of the field equipment.
And some cornfields shouldn't be grazed. I know topography is a big reason for that, but usually that's not the case in Nebraska though, right?
Yeah, that's right. You know, it's Nebraska's pretty blessed with having about 9 million acres of corn each year that's harvested for grain. Some of those fields severely slope. Typically those have low grain production, and so they don't produce as much residue. So leaving that residue on as a surface protection to erosion is a big factor for not grazing those fields. The fields that do have quite a bit of production, you know, we can see somewhere from 4.5 to 5 tons an acre of corn residue following grain harvest. And so the reason that's important is because the following year that can impede seed placement, result in some soil slow to warm up during the spring. So there are a lot of agronomic factors the following year for removing residue.
And when the cows are put out to graze a harvested cornfield, they'll really clear it out, won't they? They're selective grazers, right?
Yeah, they're selective grazers, and what that means is they pick the highest quality material first. And on a corn plant, that typically is any grain that finds its way onto the ground. A lot of the equipment is pretty good these days, so not a lot of it is spilled. That's what we're talking about, are stalks that have lodged and have some grain on the ground. So they'll go and they'll clean up the grain first. The second thing they'll pick up are the husk, which are also pretty palatable. Then the third and final thing that they go for, any leaf material that hasn't blown off of the field, they'll go in and clean that up as well.
And I know also you guys are here to talk about the Crop Residue Exchange. Tell us how that works.
Well, you know, it was motivated by just the large number of corn acres that we have, and the cows looking basically for a place to graze and for winter feed. So we set it up basically so that crop producers can list their crop, not just corn residue, but any crop residue that they have available for grazing. So it has like a Google map tool on it. So crop producer would go in and register themselves. It's minimal contact information on there. But once they're registered, then they could go ahead and create a listing, and they have a Google map tool where they can draw out the field and put in the number of acres and then the conditions that they have for the grazing piece. So if it's corn residue, they list it as corn residue, they list the dates it's available, the rental rate that they have involved, if they're providing care, if it's fenced, or if it has water, all of those particulars. So then livestock producers can go in and search those listings and find residue that is available for them to use.
And I think also, Daren, you had some other research that you wanted to mention too in relation to that.
Yeah, as Jay had interested, you know, we get kind of interested in the value of all of this. It's a little bit hard to get numbers on, but you go back, we've got 9 million acres of corn harvested for grain. About half of those acres are grazed each year. There are near 2 million beef cows in Nebraska, so the opportunity there is for both to increase the profitability of some of the crops producers and then some cost savings to the livestock producers. So we did some estimates, used some published data, used some ag statistics data, used some survey data that we had from Nebraska, and estimated that the current value of grazed crop residue be returned to the crop sector would be almost $75 million each year. So, you know, even for a dead plant, it's pretty valuable.
If you want to take advantage of the Crop Residue Exchange, the website is cropresidueexchange.unl.edu. In Nebraska, subsurface drip irrigation may not have the foothold it does in states like California. However, SDI is gaining traction as a way to improve irrigation efficiency by delivering water straight to the crop's roots, although at a slower pace and with a higher initial cost. Next year, the Testing Ag Performance Solutions Farm Management Competition will be at the West Central Research and Extension Center near North Platte. It'll offer participants a chance to irrigate their crops using SDI. Read about how the system will fit into the TAPS competition in the November Nebraska Farmer. It's time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. So Al, it was a chilly start to the week. Daytime temperatures did warm up a bit though, but I know everyone is curious as to what we can expect as we get closer to Thanksgiving.
Well, Troy, the models do look like they are showing some cooler conditions this weekend, but much more in an improvement as we move through the week. And in fact, preliminary looks with the models indicates a very nice Thanksgiving Day and potentially a very nice Thanksgiving weekend, as the models for the past 2 weeks when we did the tapings were indicating a potential of a very large, significant storm system somewhere in the central and southern plains have completely backed off on that, as we have a very powerful upper air low moving into California, and it's going to push the ridge downstream from it, blocking its movement temporarily. And so we are going to see much of the activity along the western United States and some of that energy slipping to the south of us, but bringing that energy into the central United States does not look to be in the cards, which is a good thing. I'd rather it be nice than to deal with a lot of traffic headaches. And in fact, for the harvesting activity weather, you couldn't ask for much better conditions as we go through next week, and that should help us wrap up much of the soybean harvest outside of a few fields and bring our corn harvest back basically up in the 85 to 90% completion range. So as we look at the upper air models today, we have this trough that's going to be digging toward the south, pushing cold air toward the west, and as it does so, that'll create upslope flow conditions in the panhandle, part of what we call an orographic lift, enhancing snowfall as this cold high pressure system builds toward the south. In the eastern part of the state, not a lot of moisture to work with, but in the west we may see some accumulating snowfall, and it could be moderate in some places. Now as we go on the day on Sunday, the trough begins to lift out. We see that ridge trying to push into the western part of the state, so we'll start to see some improving conditions in western Nebraska. Unfortunately, this cool high pressure will keep conditions below normal in eastern Nebraska, and we'll actually see the snowfall probably exiting out of southeast Nebraska during the early portion of the day. And then this trough basically sits here for one more day as that high pressure tries to expand toward the west. There does see a couple surface lows indicated on Monday to develop to our southwest and our east, but the moisture down in the Gulf remains there as an upper wave moves through, and that's going to cut off the flow. So as we go into the day on Tuesday, now we start to see the ridge expanding, and our temperatures are going to improve rather dramatically. A good 5 to 10 degrees. We'll be back up near the 50-degree mark easily as high pressure is firmly in control across the central plains. Look at the absence of precipitation. It's all down along the Gulf, along the eastern seaboard, and we start to see signs of some of that moving into the western United States as early as Wednesday as that continues to push the wedge even farther eastward. Low pressure in the Texas Panhandle has no moisture to work with. It's all cut off from the system moving along the Gulf Coast. That keeps us high and dry here in the central United States, so we still have good harvest activity weather. And then that ridge starts to really expand to our east. And I would not be surprised that we might even see some 60s and maybe even a 70 in southwest Nebraska if we get enough warming as this ridge builds into our region. Again, trying to develop a surface along the Texas Panhandle, but once again, that moisture slowly moving along the Gulf Coast. No moisture return. And then we see the first piece of energy coming out of that western U.S. upper air low. That starts to move across the central Rockies, but it does not have any moisture. It's moving rather rapidly, so the surface low in the Texas Panhandle just doesn't have a return moisture flow to it, so it looks like a fairly dry frontal boundary passage as most of the major activity remains off the western seaboard. Now, as we go into the 8 to 14-day forecast from next Thursday through the following Tuesday, I think that we probably see a little bit more warming than what this is indicated, and more widespread, basically all the way into the Ohio River Valley as that upper air low tries to pivot into the western United States. In terms of precipitation, from what I'm seeing from the models, it keeps most of the moisture to the south of us and overplays a lot of the northern part of this, particularly Nebraska, and points to the north. So Troy, it does look like most of our inclement weather will be this weekend, and then a very nice week ahead of us.
Thanks, Al. That'll do it for today's show. Next week, we'll get the scoop on what the annual Nebraska Rural Poll has to say about the issues impacting you. And stress affects us all. We'll learn about the Rural Ag Safety and Health Conference. Until then, wishing you a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I hope to see you right back here next week. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.